Okay. Yeah, welcome to Sarafu Network Drop-ins. We're going to have a first exploratory call about the tools we've developed. But first, to know each other a little bit more, please take turn saying your name, where you are, and what are you currently working on, so we can get to know each other a little bit more. So, for instance, Fu Yang, do you want to go first? And then just name someone else that can go next.
Hello，你可能要把声音关掉。OK，Hello everyone. We come from China. Right now we live in a rural area in Anhui province of China, and we are working on to integrate the blockchain technology into the village that we live in. There is a cooperative uh, in this village which has lasted for more than 20 years, and they have a great base on the cooperation and the community building in the village. Uh,
And another question,
and
are you already familiar with Sarafu Network, and why are you here today?
Actually, since April this year, some of us in this place uh, began to try to translate this book, Grassroots Economics, into English. No, into Chinese, sorry. We are still working on this project, and through this process, we began to know more about what you are doing, and that's why we are here, I guess. And we are trying to see how we can use your methods and your experience into our work.
Amazing. Thank you, Fu Yang.
Thank you.
Do you want to pick someone else to go after you?
Hadar Rottenberg.
Hi everyone, I'm Hadar. I'm from Israel and I work on Good Dollar, which is a cryptocurrency that implements the idea of universal basic income. I've been following Will's work and Serafu Network for a while, since I started working in the crypto space. And I'm here today basically to try and explore how we could use Good Dollar to provide liquidity and maybe credit to communities and other projects. And also we have a builders program if any projects are looking to integrate with Good Dollar. That's also something that we are looking for, and yeah, always interested in hearing what people are building.
Choose someone to go next.
I guess I'll pick Marius.
Yeah. Morning, everyone. So I'm Marius. I'm living in Germany right now. And what I'm working on is a kind of a card game called Cool City, where people can learn how to regreen ecosystems, restore water cycles, biodiversity, soils, and stuff. And it's for schools, it's for university, and having a kind of a game for learning instead of frontal teaching. I like more, and that's part of me. Happy to be here. Thank you for offering. And I give it to Fakin.
Hi, I'm Kin. I'm actually a PhD student in sociology in University of Cambridge, and my research project is about the concept of blockchain activism and crypto leftists. So I'm curious about people in the blockchain communities and like crypto communities who adopt not the capitalism but try to do something like beyond capitalism, post-capitalism, or something alternative. So I start learning from a small group of people called the crypto leftist communities, also the blockchain socialists. And I just like talk to the people around the community and start to learn about Vue work just like few weeks ago. So I'm very new about this space, but your work is so amazing, and I just like tell this story to people in my communities. I'm come from Thailand, so a great pleasure to meet you guys here today. Um, and pick someone, right? Maybe Faith.
And I hope I'm pronouncing well, but Faizan, sorry if it's not the right pronunciation. They've introduced themselves in the chat because they say they can't really talk with the connection they have. So I think there's Vivian that's left. Yep.
Hi. Hello. Hi, I'm Vivian. I'm from Taiwan. Uh, I am currently working with a network of Asian kind of change makers, but called Pagoda. I think our network probably have people who has been interacting with grassroots economics, and it was really inspiring. I just read the book earlier this year, and then looking to see what we can do. My work currently is mostly in Chiang Mai, Thailand, actually. So we are working with like a few eco villages, and then also indigenous tribes, and then trying to see how we can integrate some of their like their practices and like traditional wisdoms into what we are doing here, creating this like reciprocity kind of vibe between the community, and then definitely learned a lot from the book. We are doing later this year Cosmolocal, that we've been doing like some Cosmolocal related initiatives in Thailand, just trying to get to know the community and see how we can better incorporate some of these into what we are doing. Thank you. Is there anyone left?
Yeah, Maxime has just joined now.
Maxime then.
Hey, Maxime, are you here?
Yeah, I'm here. Hello, everybody. I'm from Ukraine. I'm coordinated of our village network, and now I'm here because I want to more understand these types of grassroots economics. We this weekend we made our second voucher from one of our location, and have a pool of question and moving to this ecosystem for understanding how we can integrate it in Ukraine, in our village network, maybe some alternative types of economics. Yeah, Um, that's my point now, and I happy to see everybody and listening your stories, how you do that, and maybe your vision. It's very interesting to me. Yeah, thank you.
Here are three representatives of grassroots. Jambi, do you want to quickly present yourself? Jambi, are you there? She's on the road, but or Will, do you want to go and say something?
Hey, everybody. I'm Will Ruddick, the founder of Grassroots Economics, and we're here in Kilifi, Kenya. And yeah, happy to just be having a regular call with folks to discuss issues, stuff that's going on in terms of like the technology, a bit in terms of like practical implementation. Jambi's our operations director and does a lot of the work with like local community groups, so she can talk more about that as well. Um, so a lot of this is just kind of also just to have some idea from what you guys are interested in talking about. We could also do breakout rooms as well. So just I'm excited to be here and thank you, Odd, for facilitating and also Odd is focused on the environmental components that we do with programs here as well. So yeah, maybe if Jambi, if you can talk without crashing your car, yeah.
Hi everyone. I'm on the road today. My name is Jambi Njoroge, Director of Operations. I'm so happy that this is happening. I'm excited to share what communities here in Kenya have been able to achieve over time and how they've been able to use blockchain. We'll talk more as we go on. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Isabel, oh yeah, yeah. Someone new has just joined. Isabel, we were just having a round of presenting ourselves. Do you want to go? Isabel, are you there? Okay. Okay, great. So if you can just drop in the chat a little presentation of yourself. Okay. And if you want to just say where you are and what you're working on, that would be awesome so we can get to know you. Thanks. Okay. So where do you go next, Will? Where do we go next from here?
I think maybe just maybe a little bit of a recap on kind of what we've done so far in Kenya and what's kind of happening around the world, and maybe a review of the website that we've been working on, and just give people an idea of kind of what the tools are. You know?
Okay.
So I can
Do that.
start. I can share screen. I can share screen here. Let me see if I can share screen. I don't know if I can here.
Yeah, you
Hold
should
on.
be able.
Okay, hold on. And folks, like, great to put questions as well in the chat as well. I think we're a small enough group that we'll see if we end up doing breakouts today or not. Otherwise, we're doing this every Tuesday and Thursday. Thursdays later in the evening,
Wednesday.
Kenyan
Wednesday.
time, and this is the morning version, and we'll do this a Wednesday. Sorry, yeah,
Yeah.
today and tomorrow, Tuesday, Wednesday. Yeah.
So we're gonna
Let me
shape
open up
that.
a little
We're
some
gonna
slides
shape
here.
that as we go. So you're welcome to join as many sessions as we want. We'll go like deepening each time as well.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll just give a brief background on myself and kind of what we've been doing the last 15 years or so, and then I'll jump into the website after that. So I was a physicist in California. That's where I grew up, and I started studying econophysics as part of a master's thesis, and got very into agent-based modeling. So like modeling how people act in economies, and started reading as well about community currencies. I think the first book I ever read was Bernard Leotar's Future of Money on that topic. And it was just very exciting to me that people were sort of innovating and designing monetary systems and monies. And there was a lot of impetus around or push for, if people don't have money, well, can they just invent their own? And that basically took me into I left physics at some point, went into economics, and then I joined the Peace Corps, which is like a volunteer organization that got me out here to Kenya, and I began to really study a lot of indigenous practices here, but I was also trying to implement things that I was seeing in other countries. So I would look at what was happening in Brazil, for instance, with Curitiba. There's a very rich history of community currency type projects. Like Berkshires in Massachusetts. There's many, many different models for those. So mostly what I did was I would show local communities what those models were doing in other countries and get their input and kind of do some action research and just work with the community to say, well, can we try to implement that? What would that look like here? What would be different? And we did many, many different models and kind of long story short, we did lots and lots of, I mean, we had situations where the Kenyan government arrested us at one point, but then we went to court and found that we weren't guilty of anything, that it's illegal to do this. So we went through a lot of steps around like understanding the legality of different types of trade agreements. And then in the last, almost 5 years now, it's just been deepening into what was really working the best in communities that we saw were groups that were doing rotational labor. So like they would use things that we would call community currencies or vouchers. They would create commitments for services, and then they would pool those together and take turns borrowing from that, right? So they would create like a common pool of commitments towards resources and then borrow from that. And there's names for that here. Mweria is one of the most common ones where we live. Um, and it turns out there's names for these types of traditions that are very similar around the whole world. And if you see the book that was published, you'll see in the back there's a few names from different countries. There's many more than that. I mean, even just in Kenya, there's like 40 names for the same kind of traditions. We work on the borders of like Somalia and Ethiopia and Uganda, and 6 or 7 different names just within one area of almost exactly the same practice. And in academia, that practice is usually called rotating labor association. So in the acronym is usually ROLA. And that's like a predecessor to what we see more in academia nowadays would be ROSCA, rotating savings and credit associations. And there's many, many varieties of those. And I'm sure you guys have all seen some version of this somewhere. And I think, a lot of the work has been just to say, well, if everyone can create a currency or even just call it a voucher or a commitment or a gift card, like if anyone can create something like that, and the blockchain's very good for that type of thing because anyone can publish to the blockchain quite easily what it is that they're offering. And we'll hopefully get into that this session or the next session more. Well, then the question became like, okay, if this community is doing it and this community is doing it and this business also wants to make their own gift cards, then what is the system that brings those together, right? How are those held together? It's a little, I think of it kind of in an analogy of like yin and yang, where like in yin and yang, like in yang is like the expression of value. Everyone can express their value, groups can express their value. Wonderful. States can express their value as national currencies, right? There's this expression of commitment and value. We may not like some of those commitments. We might be able to say like, oh, some are better than others, but yes, everyone expressed their value. Wonderful. Now, what's the yin? What holds that together? And what we were seeing in these community groups was kind of a very basic kind of protocol around curating those together. So curation is like the collection of what is valuable. How do you as a community or even as an individual, any type of agent, right? How does that agent decide what's valuable to them, including what they offer as valuable, right? So what does that look like? And then the second piece was, well, what's the relative value of those things? How do you gauge one thing versus another, right? What is the value of a day's work compared to bringing some sticks and mud to do some walls, right? And so a lot of, we get into things like units of account and price lists, right? Like if you were stocking a vending machine how would you decide what the prices of those things were? Right, you look at maybe the cost of those, so that there's stuff to go into. Using national currency market rates is another. That's quite often the norm to begin with in a lot of groups. And then there's limits as well. So if you're pulling from a commons, you're creating a commons of resources, and you're allowing people to pull from that commons, right? How does that work? What are the limits on that? Right? Like for instance, if in the village I live in here, that we are all in Auden as well here with me, and Jambi is also usually here as well. Um, Everyone can take turns. They can say, I want to pull on the resources of the community. I want everyone, or these 10 neighbors to come to my house on this day and help me with my farm or my roof or my house and build a house. They're pulling on a commons, right? They're borrowing really from it, right? And they're committing as well to giving back over time, right? So that person who gets helped is going to go and help the other people over time, right? And hopefully this is sounding familiar. It's not, this is normal in a lot of environments. I mean, even in military units, you get these types of cooperation, right? So this is like in-group cooperation, right? Like how does a group cooperate around resources and commitments that they've made? And finally, you've got kind of like so you've got curation, valuation, limitation, and the limit would be like, how much can I pull from the community before I need to give back? Right? Where is that limit? They can be fuzzy limits as well, but there's some sort of articulation. Like if a woman here says, I'm going to take from everybody in this community and I'm not going to give back for and it's been like a year. Well, there's some point at which the community says, well, you no longer have access to those resources anymore. In other words, we're not going to help you, right? Because you're no longer part of the community. Until you bring a goat and a chicken and we all have a party and we forgive you. There's all kinds of ways, kind of graduated sanctions and ways to ask for forgiveness, and which is also really fun too. So there's something about accountability around all that. And then in the Bantu language groups that are like here in Kenya and go all the way to South Africa, you'll hear this term, and you might have heard it as a software operating system called Ubuntu. So in Swahili, they use the word utu, very, very similar like Bantu roots. And the term basically means either humanity or to become a person. And to become a person, like to be of a people, to be in a group, you've got to be in relationship in that group, right? You're not separate by yourself. If you're by yourself as a human, they would call you of the species. You're a human, but you're not of the people, right? I think even, a lot of like the names of a group would be like, who are the people? How do we what's the group noun for a community of people? And that name for a group of people was often the name for this tradition. So if you were of the people, you were a person, Ubuntu means to become a person, you were in this practice of having relationship with those people around you, right? There was a network connecting. So anyway, that's just a bit on the philosophy of kind of where we gotten, and the protocols that we've put onto blockchain and whatnot. It really just those protocols, like really simple protocols that are about accountability around a commons, right? So you curate what's valuable, you value that, relative to each other. And that can be relative, there's many ways that you can do valuation. We'll get into that. There's limitation, and then there's the ability to swap or exchange things. There's also the ability to seed as well, right? Like the commons doesn't start empty. Well, you can think of it as like an empty vessel to begin with, but there needs to be something in there, right? Some sort of seed that people can borrow from, right? So I think that's a good summary of kind of where we are, and ideally it's like, as we talk about these practices and as we like work with communities around the world, we're always looking for some similarity, like kibbutzes in Israel, and have all this kind of stuff in them. There's all like a cooperation. Jackson, we work with cooperatives in the U.S. have very, very similar elements, right? So in some ways, a lot of our work has been just kind of like building up a little bit of like base language, right? How do we talk about this stuff? In a way, like yesterday, we were working with a group from Belgium, and they have a store of tools. It's like a maker space, like a lab, where they have all kinds of tools. and they can identify, how people can borrow those tools like a library. But then when they're talking about all the volunteers and all the labor and all the commitments of the people around that, they didn't really have the same language around it. They didn't have a way to articulate that on the social side of things. And so a lot of this is just, protocol. When we talk about like this as a protocol or a language, it's like, how do we expand and make sure that we're all speaking a language that we can all understand? And then the implementation of that language in technology or in different communities and different areas, ideally is like it's an expression of that language, that we're seeing happening in these different places. So nice to have everybody here from different places as well that, can sort of relate to these types of cooperations in families, in business groups, wherever you are. And then, what's the interesting thing maybe about some of the technology is that if I have a group or I've identified a pool of resources and we're borrowing from it, well, if those resources are accepted in multiple pools, right? Like if Marius or Vivian, if your commitments are accepted in this pool as well as another pool, that's very similar to like, this grandmother over here is in several groups, let's say, and she is the conduit of exchange between those groups, of trust really between those groups. And so in terms of creating an economic network now that connects between many, many different pools, there's a lot of capabilities with blockchain around that, because you're on a common information database that has a memory system, right? The blockchain provides memory, just like a village would have as well, like the individual memories of people's brains. So the blockchain provides a consensus layer for that. It provides a transparency and authentication as well, so you know who's who. So you can have a unique login to that you don't have to have a middleman for, right? So you can connect and say, this is my commitment, right? You can identify stuff like that. And also you can create agreements there. So you can publish what we call often smart contracts, which is really just like a constitution of rules around some form of agreement. So when we're talking about a pool, or like a commitment pool is the term we've been using a lot, we're talking about, is there a registry of commitments, right? Who can edit that registry, right? So that's part of the authentication. We're talking about the registry of relative pricing, like a price index. That's another kind of registry, right? So your smart contract, your agreement around the commitment pool, it contains several registries. They're lists essentially. You have the limits for each one of those commitments, right? So you have the commitment, it's got a value, it's got a limit, and then you have functions like exchange or swap, right? So if Vivian wants to put in some of her commitments as collateral to borrow some of Jambi's, the arithmetic, the math, needs to be solid there, right? We need to be able to trust that one Vivian's commitment for an hour of labor or $10 worth of product was exchanged at the rate that the community decided for Jambi's hour of training, right? And we should see that in the pool and should be reflected and transparent, right? So the blockchain provides that layer of having a memory, authentication, and then execution of those agreements, right? Actually, you can see that it did those things. And so in some ways, you can just think about the environment of the blockchain. In the Ethereum landscape, we call that the EVM, the Ethereum virtual machine. And that basically just provides an environment where we can sort of copy a lot of these social contracts that are super ancient types of social contracts and just make them transparent, and then connect across as well. So we can also look at things like routes as well. So yeah, that's a good summary. Maybe a pause there for any questions and or thoughts or next stages. Yeah. Gordon, back to you.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say we are already at the half hour, so perfect. We were synchronized. Yeah, any questions so far? Maybe we can illustrate a little bit more like what you've described, Will. I would give like maybe 10 minutes from now, so you can illustrate with the Sarafu network. How does that express in the website?
Okay.
And then we still have like 20 minutes. And any burning question or anything from anyone so far? it just takes time to step through all those concepts and ideas and implementation. So that's really the point here, is that we can have several sessions, different times to go and give deeper steps each time.
Yeah. Okay, so this is for years and years we've been doing this without a website, right? So this is fairly new for us, and we hope even to have like an app in the future. This is all open source. Like our intention is that really you can think of this whole website as an interface into the blockchain, and we use the Celo blockchain here. We use that mostly, it's a very nice community. Hadar is also part of that community as well here. But we're also one of the validators on that blockchain, which means that we can always guarantee that we can offer free usage of that blockchain to our people who are creating pools. And so that's been really important to us, because there's a token here, like if you look in the top right here, called Celo. So I'm logged in right now. And we'll get maybe more into very, very specifics of how to create an account, how to log in. But this amount of Celo right here is needed. You need some amount of Celo, very, very small, like 0.001, to actually publish to the blockchain and to do interactions with it. So it's very cheap. We make it free as a nonprofit foundation. We're getting a lot of rain here, so I hope you guys can still hear me. So there's more to go into that. There's quite a few ways to create accounts. But maybe I'll just kind of give you a high level overview to begin with. This is right now in Africa. Mostly we're focused in on Kenya. That's where we are, and that's kind of where we validate a lot of the work and efforts being done. These big marks are like the numbers of vouchers in different areas that have been created. And a voucher, again, is like what we call like a commitment for future or past work. So we'll go deeper into that. If I zoom in here, you can see like these are a lot of vouchers around where we are. We're based here, so most of our work is focused around here. These little green dots are see if I can get rid of that, are reports. So you can file a report or create like a even information, education, or communication about what you're doing. So there's this ability to create reports over here, and you can tag which vouchers are being used there. And so this is more and more happening all over the world. I mean, there's groups in Europe, in the US, doing more and more, just starting. We've got some in Ukraine. Maxime's here today. A bit of work in the US going on, different areas, South America as well. Quite a bit of focus around Brazil as well. And so this is really just in the last maybe half a year or so of just kind of making these tools available online. And this is just a first draft, and the website needs a lot of tender loving care and advice from folks on how to make it better. And then ideally, integrations and more kind of tech. There's a whole tech kind of roadmap we can get into as well, maybe as a breakout. So pools, as I was talking about, pools are collections of vouchers, right? They're a curation of, really, it doesn't have to be purely a voucher. It can be any digital asset that's available on the blockchain. There's a standard for that called ERC20, which basically means that it's a digital asset that you can send to someone, right? So you can create one of these things. So any of you can go and create one of these here. By clicking plus here, you can make your own voucher. You can also make your own pools. So if I look at a pool, let's say that I'm managing, inside the pool, you can see activities that are going on. So this is a collection of reports from the different vouchers that are in here. So this is an activity that Maxime has done. And there's more from different groups here. If I look at the vouchers in here, this is kind of what is allowed in the pool. So if you remember the protocol here, you have your curation, what is allowed in there, right? What's allowed to go into that pool. Then you have your valuation. What are the values of those things? And in this case, they're all given 1-to-1 rates to the US dollar. Okay. And when we say CUSD, that's actually a stable coin to the US dollar. And then you have your limitation. So that's the amount of each of these that can go into this pool. So if you imagine this is like a pool, like a jar or a bowl, how many of each of these tokens are allowed to go into this bowl? And then we have something called swapping here. So a swap is where I say I select a token that I have, and let me refresh here. I think let me go into another pool. I don't have any of these tokens in this account. Let's try this one. So this is groups across Kenya here. There we go. So I'm the admin for this token, so I can edit some of the information and images. There can be fees on this, and we can talk about fees in terms of like volume fees. You can charge fees on usage of a pool. You can donate into a pool, like with a credit card. So you can go from national currency or a Visa or MasterCard directly into stable coins with this. Or you can support the pool directly with tokens or vouchers that you have in your wallet. And so that's, as soon as you log in, create an account, you have a wallet, right? That's your personal store of tokens. Then a pool is kind of like a public store of tokens. It's where you're allowing people to exchange those together. So if I look at the vouchers here, this is all the vouchers across Kenya. So we've created a pool together with all the community groups we work with in Kenya, and there's over, I think, 100 or so in here. And so each one of these groups has a credit line. You can think of this as like a village savings and loan associations, or in Kenya, we call these chamas, where each one of these groups can put in their voucher. They can swap. They can select a token they have. Let me select. So I have some of these Mumos. I would say I want to exchange some Mumos for, there's dollars in the pool, for instance, or any of these other vouchers. There's not always money in the pool. Right. And I would say, okay, the maximum amount I can do right now is, that's my credit line. I can do 1.24 Mumos. I can swap these in. These are commitments that I hold for other things that are in there. Right. I'm exchanging my commitments for whatever is in the pool. Right. And this must follow the rates set here. Right. And it must also follow the limits, right? Like how many Mumos can go into the pool, right? That's the limit on this, and how many dollars are left in the pool. Right? If I was to choose a different one here, like Mungano, I would maybe have a different limit, but that's actually just how many Mumo I have. I don't think I have any of these other tokens that are in here right now. Oh, I do. Yeah, I can do Simbas, for instance, right? So I can do 124 Simbas, and I could trade that for more, let's say, Munganos, right? I would end up with, I should be a different limit of Simbas. So that's based on, again, how many Mumos are in there. So again, it's like you're creating a commons of resources. I'm borrowing this resource, but in order to borrow, I have to put in something of equal value, okay? And this is really not, it's not a physical thing. This is a commitment for future services, right? And we can look at what these actually are. So if I say swap here, there's going to be a bunch of validations and transactions that go through. Like 3 times you have to approve a swap. On the blockchain, you have to prove that you can do that. You have to say that, yes, please, put this in here and pull this out. So there's some technicalities around that, but you click swap, this goes in, this comes out. Okay. And then I have those move vouchers, and I would use those by going to that person or that group that makes these, or business, and I would say, I have some of your gift cards or your vouchers worth 147, let's say, shillings, right? And they would be obligated, right, by this commitment to give me 140 shillings worth of services. And if that's not enough for the product, I might have to top that up with other Kenyan shillings. And generally, like, each business or each individual will accept only their own token. It's like if you are McDonald's or Burger King, like McDonald's only accepts McDonald's gift cards. They don't accept Burger King, right? So what you're doing is here, you're creating a space where you're swapping one commitment for another, right? And then you would spend that, you would go and redeem that for goods and services. And if I click on one of these, let's look at an example here. So this is Kiribu. So as soon as when you create a voucher, when you click plus here, you're going to be asked a bunch of questions, and it's going to create a website for you like this. So you'll have your own website, and you can create multiple vouchers as well. You can give products. You can say what products are available. So this is like a cooperative business. They offer a whole bunch of different products. Okay. They offer these, and they say that one token is worth 10 shillings of products. That is a claim, right? That is, think of it as a gift card. So if I'm given some of these, I have a gift card, and I can use these to get some of these products. I could also swap those, and the organization can, in any of these pools. So they're in multiple pools here. So I think I want to pause there. I can show you, like, you can also look at where these vouchers are in the network as well. So like this is just that community using that one single voucher, right? And if I look at, across the entire world, we can look at how there's different vouchers in different places in the world and how they're connected to each other as well. So this is all anonymous data that's on the blockchain. Each dot here is a different user, which could be a business or a family or a group. And each color here is a different commitment or voucher. And so this is like groups of people that are connected with each other. They're doing these like Mueria practices. And this is another group doing Mueria practices. And they're connected through something like a common pool, right? Where they're able to exchange between the different groups like that. So this is like a group connecting to another group. And, there's all kinds of groups connected to each other in different ways. And some are not connected to each other at all. Like this group they're trading with each other, but they've yet to form a pool or be added to a pool with other people. And so this is just looking at clusters, without a map. It's just looking at how often they actually work with each other. So let me stop there. That was a mouthful. I see a question here. Yeah. Yeah. Maybe folks can raise hands as well. But I can start with this question that's on the chat. How do you approach educating communities around using this tool? Because it's from the Mary Press, it's easy understood. Asking, yeah. Yeah, so the idea is to kind of look at what are things that make sense with people. And if the second half of the book that we just have out has kind of like how we work with communities, and usually we'll come in and do what's called a visionary approach, which is really kind of like a design workshop where the community talks about, individuals talk about what are their goals, what are the goals of the community, looking at a vision of like for the next year, what are they trying to reach as a family or a household. Really concrete, as much as real vision as you can think of, like you can really see it. And then we go into kind of like a community audit, like a resource mapping. What are all the resources people have that they're already like, what services do you already sell, or what services are you willing to offer, right? And so we sort of build up that list of what could be commitments in a community, right? So you have this vision and you have all these resources, right? So there's like this tension between those two things. And so the question is, how do we get from here, with these resources we have, into that vision? And usually it's like when you're working with a sizable community, I mean, even like 10 neighbors, there's a lot of resources. It's more than you would imagine. Like people have a lot of services that they can offer, and people often, that's just a really nice thing for people to realize, like, oh, there's a lot available, but it's not necessarily available is the problem. So how do we take all those resources and put them together in like a fair way to reach that vision, and usually what's nice about like Kenya, for instance, is that anyone like who's over maybe 40 years old remembers living like this when they were a child. They can remember being able to borrow resources from the community, right, in these traditions, and give back over time. Right. They can remember that. And so that's really powerful. And there's, so like when you say the word Mueria here, people are like, oh, it's almost like magic, it's like a magic word. Oh, there's this magic word. It's a thing. In the US, people don't have that as much. But if we like, I was in like Mississippi, and like the Black community that, like the history of like slavery coming into Mississippi and all this stuff, they had things which they called lotteries. Like the original lottery was everyone gets a turn to borrow from this pool of resources or even money, right? And so they would recognize this as something like a lottery. And that was the old version of the lottery, right? So they're there, and probably within your community, and even today, like in a corporation, you have the ability to use the assets of the corporation, but of course you need to give back somehow to the corporation, right? Maybe if it's like the lunchroom or the tools of a business, there's probably a way to translate that. And so often that's what we're looking for in education, is just to translate. How do you translate what people are doing into a language that helps them, like a science would help, right? It's like, when we talk about the science of like plant growth, and we talk about like nitrogen and potassium and phosphorus, it's just to understand how the plants are growing, right? So that's what we're trying to do. We're just trying to understand how can people cooperate around shared resources. How do we give language to that? in a real clear way, and then provide tooling, what are other tools to make that better. So that's mostly
Can I
we're
add
working
something
a little.
also here?
Yeah. Thanks.
Also like to answer Isabel's question on the practical aspect of it. Like as Will was saying before, all of that was done on feature phones also, without the need of having even a phone where you can have access to internet. So there's a low tech aspect of that, and what we do here, and it's quite easy in Kenya in terms of technicalities, is like, I don't know if you've heard about M-Pesa. That's a system that works really normally where people use already a kind of digital currency in a way. It's really normal to do that. So it's not that new for them to be using those systems as well. So that's quite interesting also. And most of the time, if, for instance, to do the reporting, what we try to make sure is that there's at least one phone that's able to be used to make all the reporting and whatever cannot be done through a feature phone. So it doesn't mean that everyone needs to have this access. Is that like with having one phone for a whole community, that's enough to do that work? And most of the time, also the methodologies we implement around that, there are community leaders within those groups that take the role, and those roles can also be in rotation of who's gonna actually do this more like reporting and going back and forth between the community and the Sarafu network in a way.
Yeah. Now, Isabel, one thing too is like we try to avoid kind of educating people around money so much. I assume that people know what money is, and that's the commitment of the state. I don't try to invent new money. And that's been, 20 years of my life in the opposite, where I was trying to make new kinds of money. And I was like, oh, we can all make money. And it was by working with local traditions and also looking at the tradition of money itself. Like money is a word that comes from the Roman Empire. And it was the tradition of giving commitments for security to towns, right? So the Roman Empire would say, I will protect you as long as you pay me with this money. And they called it money because it was in the temple of Juno Moneta. That was the goddess of protection, right? So there was this tradition where they would go in and say, I'll protect you as long as you have this money. And so the villages would have to get that money. How would they get the money? They have to work for the Romans. Okay. That was the tradition of the Roman Empire. And that was passed down to the British and the whole feudal system, and that was passed into the colonial system, right? So when we say the word money, and actually what people recognize as money is a commitment generally of the state, and it's a traditional term. We're using a tradition that comes from the Roman Empire, and the Romans inherited it from a few other states as well, but they really solidified it. So it's a traditional system. It's a type of commitment. And so when we're working with community groups, we just say, great, we recognize that as a kind of a commitment of the state. It's a tradition. We can recognize exactly when it came into Kenya. It's quite obvious, right? That people were forced by the British to pay a fee, right, for every hut. So the British came in and say, you have to pay us with this money. And the only way you can get that money is by working on our plantations. So everyone knows where money came from. It's a very specific tradition, and it is what it is, and I leave it at that. And to me, that's been a bit of letting go. Like we don't need to, in my mind, we don't need to reinvent money. Money is a tradition of states, offering services to their people. Fine. We might not like it, yada, yada. There's problems with it, all the board. But the real key to me is, well, what do we do with commitments, and how can we make our own commitments? How do we manage our own resources, including money? Like money's a resource, fine, for sure. It's a resource. Maybe we have problems with it somehow, but it's a resource as well. And if you look at the movement of these traditions, most of them in Kenya and most of Africa became tabletop banking groups. They do the same tradition as Mweria, but they do it with money. So they all chip in some money, right? And they take turns borrowing from that money. Either they do it in a rotation, or they have different rules on how to borrow from that money. It's just that we only have one asset now called money, that we can borrow. And that's a bummer because there's so many other assets, right, that we could potentially work with. And if money's the only one we have to work with, then, we end up in a situation where we end up, what quote unquote colonized, right? That was the colonial method, was kind of, to control people that way. So, yeah. Any other questions, guys? Or thoughts, Mawazos? What are you thinking? We could do maybe a round. We don't have a lot of time. Yeah. Oh, I see Vivian. Go ahead. And feel free to type too. Yeah.
Yeah, very curious about like how say initially did you say onboard the first community to do these practices? I understand that you've been working with your traditions, but introducing like technology to them and then like fully onboard them to using these tools is kind of like I feel like it's like a different part of the process. And after that, like it seems that there are different communities approaching you. Just wondering how these is there like kind of a evaluation, like is this community ready for this, or like what is the kind of method for spreading the tool or methodology itself? And after the visionary or the workshop, that process, is there any follow-up? Like I saw in the book that you mentioned like stewards. Is there training for that, or how do you identify these to make sure that the practices can continue?
Yeah. Thanks, Vivian. Good question. I'll give some examples. Like there's a university in Mtito, just on the way to Nairobi here, called Lukenya, and they had wanted to set up something like this for a long time because they have a lot of students that wanted to take student loans. That they have the problem where the students can't necessarily repay the student loans. And so what they did was, I mean, we did some training with them. There was one of the professors from the university came and worked with us. His name is Abdul Hakim. He's actually written, I wrote about him in the book as well. He's a Islamic finance scholar as well. And so in Islamic finance, this system would be called a WAQF, Waqf. And basically the university got together with their bursar and they said, well, we can make a commitment for tuition. And so a lot of it was just looking at the existing commitments they're already making, right? And so a lot of it's what we would call in blockchain, we say tokenizing. You're tokenizing a real world asset. In this case, you're tokenizing a commitment for tuition, which is like a subscription, right? You're taking a subscription and saying, oh, I can create a token that if redeemed will allow a person to pay for or redeem it for their school fees. Okay. So in that case, it was a group, looking at what they wanted to do, which was make it easier for students to pay off their loans and have more community around. So they had a goal, right? Did visionary approach. We looked at what they had to offer in terms of the assets of the schools. And then we also looked at the rest of the community around them. So we looked at shopkeepers in the local area. Could they also create something like a gift card? What else could be in that pool, right? And then they said to the students, all right, you're going to be allowed to now borrow tuition, but you have to put in your commitment to do something in the community of equal value. So the students would put in a collateral token swap, right? And they'd be able to pull out these tuition vouchers. They could use, and as well as little local shop vouchers. There was all kinds of stuff within that network, and it meant that like the debt between the student and the university was no longer just between them, because it meant that anyone in that community could also put in their debt into the pool, their commitments, and pull out the student's debt, right? So someone else could buy out that student's debt and then get that student to work for them, right? And say, I need you to work for me, right? You can pay off your debt by working for me, right? And so they were able to do what in economics we would call this multilateral offsetting, or multilateral debt clearing, or credit clearing, or invoice factoring. There's a bunch of names for this in economics. Basically, what you're doing is you're saying we're getting rid of a bilateral or one-to-one debt, and we're saying let's allow that debt to move around the whole community. And that's what we see in the village here too, right? Like when someone has a debt here, well, they can pay it off through the rest of the community because they're all connected to each other, right? So I don't know that I answered your question well. I wanted to give you an example that was kind of outside of a village setting and into more of a corporate or business setting in terms of how they did that. There's a lot of, we can go through more and more examples, but in that case, the steward in that case was Abdul Hakim. He's he was a PhD professor in this case, and he's been able to now kind of train the rest of the groups on, within his university on how to use the technology, how to set it up. And, he sends us a lot of also problems he has in terms of fixing stuff, if there's problems in the tech and whatnot. So that's been a really, a nice example of like someone coming in and acting as that steward. And as the university, they can also charge fees on that as well. So every time there's a swap in that, they can say, we're going to keep 1%, and that goes into an insurance fund in case people default, right? So, people backing out or people not fulfilling their commitments can happen in any case. And so that, you're getting into what's kind of like a credit union in a way, right? So everyone's putting their assets into the credit union. They're part of that credit union, right? And then people can borrow now based on what they put in. Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Cheers.
We are getting to the hour now. So yeah, I don't know if there is more questions or more action steps that anyone want to get, or if there's any like what if we were to meet on the next call, what would you like to explore? That would also be useful.
So I have a question. Imagine I would have a project, then I ask you at first, or I'm able to have access to the website and do the project, and what is the way to do this?
Okay, so I mean, maybe we'll get into that. If I answer it now, we'll start getting overboard. But I mean, technically, the system I just added a Signal group that is one option for people to chat on and ask some of those questions as well. But the technology works, and people are the onboarding into the tech is probably the hardest part. But technically, it's usable right now. Right. It's just that there's some bells and whistles and, there's a learning curve, and we're trying to make it simpler and simpler. Hopefully by the end of the year, we'll have it, much more simple. But for now, you still have to get like a blockchain wallet first, like MetaMask or, one of these blockchain wallets to use and yada, yada. There's some steps to get in. And that's, I would love like maybe next time to really just go through those steps, and everyone here makes a voucher as an example and makes a pool,
Yeah. So if you want to join, like maybe next week, that same time, so we can give a further step all together here. Vivian has already left, but you can get in touch with her. Is that okay for today? Yeah.
Cool. Okay.
Okay.
Same bat time next week.
Yeah. Same time next week, and we can get in the practice of it.
Cool.
Okay. Wonderful.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone. All right. Have a good week. Bye.
I mean, tomorrow we'll also have a call, right?
There's also a call tomorrow as well with other people.
Yeah, you're welcome to join. Yeah.
Yeah,
We
for
did it for
sure.
like different time zones. So the call tomorrow, I think, is in the evening.
Yeah.
So that might be in China. That might be very late or early for you. I'm not sure.
Thank
tomorrow. Let me check. Tomorrow it's Wednesday. It's at 6 in here for us. It's 5 in Europe. Yeah, so I don't know for you in China.
That's midnight in China.
Okay. So if you're still awake, you're welcome.
Maybe next week.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Marius.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, Marius, I love to talk about card games too. We're working a lot on games. We play a lot of games with community groups too. So we're super fun, and we thinking about card games a lot too. So yeah, that would be fun.
Marius is the one I met with yesterday as well, and was also connected to that Indian project,
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Love to talk more, but we'll do it next time. All right. Ciao, ciao.
All right. Bye-bye.
Ciao. Bye.